The autumn sun cast golden light across the rows of Cabernet Sauvignon vines at Chateau Rousseau, Napa Valley's most exclusive wine estate, where a single bottle sold for $1,200 and waiting lists stretched 3 years deep. Dominic Rousseau stood on the terrace of his limestone chateau, swirling a glass of his award-winning 2019 Reserve, his tailored Tom Ford suit fitting his athletic frame like a second skin. At 38, he had achieved what most sommeliers only dreamed of, a master sommelier certification before 30, 3 Michelin stars for his estate's restaurant, and recognition from Wine Spectator as the future of American viticulture. But beneath the accolades and the 8-figure bank account, something felt hollow, like a wine that looked perfect but lacked soul. He divorced Simone 2 years ago when he caught her sleeping with investors at charity auction, and since then, the estate felt more like a museum than a home. In the vineyard below, Elena Flores wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her work glove, her worn jeans and faded flannel shirt stained with grape juice and soil. She'd been working the harvest at Chateau Rousseau for 3 months, one of 30 seasonal workers who picked grapes from dawn until dusk for $15 an hour, cash under the table. The other workers thought she was just another immigrant chasing the California dream, and she never corrected them. The truth was too painful, too complicated, too dangerous to share. Every evening, she returned to the cramped apartment she shared with 3 other workers in Napa, heating up beans and tortillas on a hot plate while reviewing her notes about the vineyard's terroir, fermentation processes, and the subtle wrongness she detected in Barrel Room 3. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Mija, wine tells the truth when men lie. You just have to listen." Something was wrong with the fermentation in Barrel Room 3, and Elena knew it with the same certainty she knew her own heartbeat. She'd tasted the must 3 days ago when no one was looking. Sweet, too sweet, artificially sweet in a way that had nothing to do with the natural sugars in perfectly ripe grapes. Someone was adding refined sugar to fermenting wine, a cardinal sin in premium winemaking that would create an artificial sweetness, masking the true character of the terroir. Tomorrow was a big harvest celebration, when Dominic Rousseau would walk the vineyard with wine critics and investors, and she knew she had to speak up, even though speaking up had cost her everything once before. She clutched her grandmother's silver cross beneath her shirt, said a silent prayer, and decided that some things mattered more than keeping her head down. Hello, my friends. Before we continue our story, leave your like, share the story, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Dominic Rousseau's morning ritual never varied. Espresso from his La Marzocco machine, black, 2 shots, while reviewing the previous day's production reports in his climate-controlled office overlooking the estate. Today's report showed perfect progress. Fermentation temperatures ideal, sugar levels textbook, his head winemaker Andre's notes indicating they were on track for the best vintage in Chateau Rousseau's 15-year history. The harvest celebration tonight would cement his reputation, with Robert Parker himself flying in from Los Angeles to taste the young wine, and Dominic had already ordered 5 cases of Dom Perignon for the after-party. He adjusted his Patek Philippe watch, a gift himself after his divorce, and headed down to Barrel Room for his daily inspection, expecting perfection because he demanded nothing less. His father had always said, "Mediocrity is a choice. Dominic, choose excellence or choose failure." Andre Beaumont stood in Barrel Room 3, his lean frame bent over a glass beaker, when Dominic entered. The Frenchman had been Chateau Rousseau's head winemaker for 7 years, recruited from Bordeaux with promises of creative freedom and partnership shares, and Dominic trusted him completely. "Morning, Andre," Dominic said, his voice echoing off the stone walls lined with French oak barrels, each worth $3,000. "Everything on schedule for tonight?" Andre straightened, his handsome face arranging itself into a confident smile that didn't quite reach his gray eyes. "Parfait, mon ami," he said, his accent thick and deliberate. "The wine, she is beautiful. Parker will write sonnets." Dominic noticed Andre's hand trembling slightly as he set down the beaker, but dismissed it as excitement about the evening's event. In the vineyard, Elena moved between the rows with practiced efficiency, her picking basket nearly full of perfect Cabernet clusters. The other workers chatted in Spanish around her, gossip about whose daughter was dating whom, whose son had gotten a scholarship to community college, and she smiled politely but kept her thoughts to herself. She'd learned years ago that revealing too much invited questions she couldn't answer without reopening wounds that hadn't fully healed. Maria, a grandmother of 6 who became Elena's closest friend at the vineyard, nudged her shoulder and offered a tamale wrapped in foil. "You look worried, Mija," Maria said, her weathered face kind beneath her wide-brimmed hat. "Something wrong?" Elena hesitated, then shook her head. "Just, have you noticed anything strange about Barrel Room 3? Maria's expression shifted to confusion. "I pick grapes. Elena, I don't go into barrel rooms." She lowered her voice. "Why? What's wrong?" Elena bit her lip, wondering if she was being paranoid, if her training was making her see problems that didn't exist. But she'd grown up in her family's vineyard in Guadalupe Valley, had watched her father and grandfather coax magic from Nebbiolo grapes using techniques passed down through generations, and she knew with absolute certainty when something was off. "The fermentation smells wrong," she finally said. "Too sweet, like someone's cheating." Maria's eyes widened, and she crossed herself quickly. "Ay, Dios mío! Don't say things like that. Elena, you want to lose this job." Elena knew Maria was right. That smart survival meant keeping quiet and collecting her paycheck. But her grandmother's voice wouldn't stop. "Silence makes you complicit." The harvest celebration began at 7. The estate's grand lawn transformed into an elegant party space with string lights, white-clothed tables, and a jazz quartet playing soft standards. Dominic worked the crowd with the ease of someone born to privilege. Handshake here, air kiss there, perfectly timed laugh at an investor's mediocre joke. Robert Parker held court near the bar, his legendary palate the subject of whispered reverence, and Dominic planned to present the new vintage at precisely 8:30, when the golden hour light would hit the wine glasses just right. His ex-wife Simone had somehow secured an invitation, probably through her new boyfriend, some tech billionaire from Silicon Valley, and Dominic spotted her across the lawn in a crimson Valentino dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. She caught his eye and raised her champagne flute in a mocking toast, her Botox face frozen in a smile that made his stomach turn. 2 years divorced, and she still found ways to needle him, still showed up at his events like a beautiful, expensive ghost. Andre appeared at Dominic's elbow with 2 glasses of the 2023 vintage, the wine still young, but showing promise, and they clinked crystal before sipping. "To our best year yet," Andre said, his smile bright but his eyes darting toward Simone across the lawn. Dominic noticed but chose to ignore it. Andre's personal life was none of his business, as long as the wine was perfect. "Have you seen the vineyard workers anywhere?" Dominic asked absently, scanning the crowd. "I wanted to thank them before the presentation." Andre's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "They're not invited to this, Dominic. This is for critics and investors." Dominic frowned, a flash of guilt passing through him. "Right, of course," he said, but something about Andre's tone bothered him, a dismissiveness that felt wrong. Before he could pursue the thought, Parker approached with questions about oak aging, and Dominic slipped into his role as host, pushing the discomfort aside. Elena watched the party from the edge of the vineyard, still in her work clothes, her hands stained purple from grape juice. She hadn't planned to come, had actually been walking toward the parking lot when something pulled her back. Maybe fate, maybe stupidity, maybe her grandmother's ghost. The laughter and music floated across the vines, a world she'd once belonged to but could never enter again, at least not to the front door. She thought about her father's vineyard in Guadalupe Valley, the harvest festivals where everyone, owners, workers, children, celebrated together with carne asada and her grandmother's legendary mole. This felt different, colder, more performative, like wine selected for its price tag rather than its soul. She was about to turn away when she saw Andre slip away from the party, heading toward Barrel Room 3 with a purposeful stride that made her pulse quicken. Without thinking, she followed. The barrel room was dim, lit only by safety lights casting shadows across the rows of oak. Elena pressed herself against the stone wall near the entrance, watching as Andre pulled out a key and unlocked the restricted section where the reserve vintages aged in darkness. He was carrying something, a bag, white, innocuous, and when he thought no one was watching, he emptied it into an open barrel, stirring quickly with a long steel rod. Even from 15 feet away, Elena could smell it. Refined sugar, processed chemical, completely wrong for wine fermentation. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she understood what she was seeing. Deliberate sabotage, systematic and calculated, destroying Dominic's wine from the inside out. Andre worked quickly, adding sugar to 3 more barrels before sealing them, and Elena knew with terrifying certainty that if she didn't act now, the entire vintage would be ruined, and no one would ever know why. Andre spun around, his face cycling through shock, fear, and finally cold anger in less than 3 seconds. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his accent suddenly less pronounced, more threatening. "What are you doing here?" Elena forced herself to stand tall despite her racing heart, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "I'm Elena, I work the vineyard," she said, keeping her voice steady. "And I'm asking what you're doing to those barrels." Andre's eyes narrowed, assessing her. Dirty work clothes, brown skin, callous hands, and his expression shifted to contempt. "You're a picker," he said dismissively, moving to block her view of the barrels. "Go back to the parking lot before I call immigration." The threat hit like a slap, familiar and vicious, but Elena refused to flinch. "You're adding sugar to the wine," she said, her voice stronger now. "Refined sugar during fermentation. It'll create artificial sweetness that'll ruin the terroir expression." Andre's face went pale, then flushed with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about," he hissed, stepping closer in a way meant to intimidate. "You pick grapes for minimum wage. You don't know anything about winemaking." Elena held her ground, thinking of her father, of her grandfather, of every lesson learned in the vineyard where she'd taken her first steps. "I know enough to recognize sabotage," she said quietly. "And I know Mr. Rousseau needs to hear about this before he serves that wine to Robert Parker." Andre's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to hurt. "You're not telling anyone anything," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're an illegal immigrant picker who was caught stealing wine. That's what I'll say if you open your mouth." Elena tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "I'm not illegal," she said through gritted teeth. "And I'm not stealing. I'm trying to help." Andre laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Help? You think Dominic Rousseau is going to listen to you over me? I have 7 years here, awards, reputation. You have dirt under your fingernails." He released her wrist with a shove that sent her stumbling backward. "Get out of here before I have security throw you out." Elena rubbed her wrist, feeling the bruises already forming, and made a decision that would change everything. She ran toward the party, her work boots kicking up dust, her breath coming in gasps. The string lights and laughter seemed surreal after the darkness of the barrel room, and she pushed through the crowd of well-dressed guests who looked at her with varying degrees of disgust and confusion. "Mr. Rousseau," she called out, spotting Dominic near the presentation table where glasses of the new vintage waited. "Mr. Rousseau, please. I need to talk to you." Dominic turned, his expression shifting from annoyance to shock at the sight of a dirty vineyard worker crashing his elegant party. Robert Parker raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the disruption, and the jazz quartet stopped playing. "Security," Dominic called out, his voice sharp. "Get her out of here." But Elena kept moving forward, desperate to make him understand. "The wine in barrel room 3 has been tampered with," she said urgently, aware of hundreds of eyes on her now. "Someone's adding refined sugar to fermentation. It'll ruin the entire vintage." The crowd murmured, critics pulling out phones to record what was quickly becoming the most dramatic harvest celebration in Napa Valley history. Dominic's face turned red with anger and embarrassment, and he strode toward her with barely controlled fury. "How dare you," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze a California night. "How dare you come into my home, interrupt my event, and make outrageous accusations about my winemaking process?" Elena felt tears stinging her eyes but forced them back. "I'm not making accusations. I saw it happen just now in—" "You saw nothing." Dominic cut her off, his master sommelier ring glinting in the string lights as he pointed toward the exit. "You're a seasonal worker who clearly has delusions of grandeur." He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying across the lawn. "This woman was hired 3 months ago to pick grapes. Apparently, she's decided that qualifies her critique my winemaking methods." Cruel laughter rippled through the guests, and Elena felt her face burning with humiliation. Mr. Russo, please. She tried again, but he held up his hand to silence her. I've heard enough, he said. Andre. The head winemaker appeared from the shadows, his face arranged in concern. Yes, Dominic? Dominic gestured to Elena. Did you catch this woman tampering with the barrels in room 3? Andre's performance was flawless. Shock, then understanding, then sympathetic sadness. I did notice her near the barrels earlier, he said carefully, his French accent thick again. I thought she was just lost, but now... He trailed off, shaking his head. Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, reality twisting into nightmare. That's a lie, she said, her voice cracking. He was the one adding sugar. I watched him do it. Simone laughed from her position near the bar, a crystalline sound full of malice. Oh, this is rich, she called out. A vineyard worker trying to destroy your reputation. Dominic, how poetic. More laughter, more phones recording, and Elena realized with sickening certainty that no one would believe her, that her brown skin and dirty clothes had already convicted her in this crowd's eyes. Dominic pulled out his phone, his jaw set. I'm calling the sheriff, he said. Breaking and entering. Attempted sabotage. Please don't, Elena interrupted, and hated herself for the desperation in her voice. I'm just trying to help. If you test the wine in barrel room 3, you'll see I'm right. Dominic's eyes were ice. The only thing I see is a woman who's about to be arrested, unless she leaves immediately. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You have 30 seconds to get off my property or I'm pressing charges. Elena looked past him at the crowd. The sneering critics, the contemptuous investors, Simone filming the whole thing on her iPhone, Andre watching with barely concealed satisfaction. You're making a terrible mistake, she whispered. The only mistake I made was not screening my workers better. Dominic said coldly. Security, escort her out, and call everyone we contract with. Make sure she's blacklisted from every vineyard in Napa. The security guard were gentle but firm, taking her arms and guiding her toward the parking lot while 300 people watched and whispered. Elena didn't resist, didn't cry, just let herself be led away while her grandmother's voice whispered in her mind. They can take your dignity, Mija, but only if you give it to them. At the parking lot entrance, she turned back one last time and saw Dominic raising his glass of presentation, saw Robert Parker preparing to taste a wine that would destroy him, and felt a terrible sadness for what was about to happen. Then the gates closed, and she walked into the darkness alone. 3 months later, Dominic Russo stood in his office, staring at an email that might as well have been a death sentence. International Wine Distributors, his largest account, representing 40% of his global sales, was formally rejecting the entire 2023 vintage after blind tastings in New York, London, and Hong Kong. Artificial sweetness inconsistent with terroir. The email read, chemical notes suggesting sugar additives during fermentation. This wine does not meet the standards for the Chateau Russo brand. The words blurred as Dominic read them for the 10th time, his hands shaking with something between rage and terror. $40 million. That's what the vintage was worth on paper. $40 million of wine now worthless. Maybe worse than worthless because the rejection implied intentional fraud. His phone buzzed with texts from other distributors, sommeliers, critics. Everyone who pre-ordered the vintage now backing out, distancing themselves from what Wine Spectator was calling the Great Russo Scandal. Robert Parker had published a scathing article questioning Dominic's integrity, suggesting he'd cheated to create artificial complexity, and the Michelin Guide had sent an inspector to review his restaurant rating. Dominic's lawyer had called 3 times that morning, warning about lawsuits from investors who bought futures on the vintage, and his accountant had delivered worse news. Without the 2023 sales, Chateau Russo would be bankrupt within 6 months. The estate his father had dreamed of, that Dominic had built into a temple of excellence, was collapsing around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. Andre stood in the doorway, his face grave. I've tested every barrel again, he said, shaking his head. I don't understand it. The numbers were perfect during fermentation. Dominic wanted to throw something, to scream, to demand answers that nobody had. Test them again, he ordered. There has to be an explanation. Andre nodded sympathetically. I will, of course, but Dominic... He paused delicately. Perhaps it's time to consider selling? Cut your losses before they become insurmountable. Dominic's head snapped up. Sell? This estate is my life. Andre, I'm not selling. But even as he said it, he knew the Frenchman was right, that pride wouldn't pay creditors or save the vineyard his father had loved. His phone buzzed again. Simone, texting a link to TMZ where they'd posted video of the harvest celebration incident 3 months ago, the vineyard worker's words now sickeningly prophetic. The wine in barrel room 3 has been tampered with. Dominic watched the video with mounting horror. Seeing himself dismiss her, humiliate her, have her thrown out. The comments below were merciless. She tried to warn him. Karma is real. Rich asshole got what he deserved. He paused the video on her face. Brown eyes wide with desperation, work clothes stained with honest sweat, and something else he'd been too arrogant to recognize at the time, certainly born of expertise. Find her, he said abruptly to Andre. What? Andre's voice had an edge of alarm. Find who? Dominic replayed the video, zooming in on her face. The woman from a harvest celebration. The one who tried to warn me. Andre's expression hardened. Dominic, she was probably the one who sabotaged. No, Dominic interrupted, clarity hitting him like cold water. She wasn't sabotaging. She was trying to stop it. Andre launched into arguments about wasted time and false leads, but Dominic wasn't listening anymore. He pulled up security footage from that night, watching frame by frame as the woman ran from barrel room 3, and behind her, just for a moment, Andre closing a barrel, stirring something, movements quick and furtive. Dominic felt his stomach drop. Get out, he said quietly. Dominic, Andre started, but Dominic stood up, his full height and fury filling the office. Get out before I call the police. Andre left without another word, and Dominic sat back down, his mind racing through memories. Andre's trembling hands that morning, his suggestion to sell, the way his accent had thickened at convenient moments. But mostly he thought about the woman who'd risked everything to warn him, who'd been right, and who he destroyed for her honesty. Finding her took 2 weeks of investigation, calling every vineyard in Napa, checking Social Security databases, legally questionable but desperate times, until finally a private investigator found an Elena Flores working at a taco truck in Sonoma. Dominic drove there himself on a foggy Tuesday morning, his Porsche 911 absurdly out of place in the strip mall parking lot where a truck served early construction workers and landscapers. She stood at the service window in an apron and hairnet, her English fluent as she joked with customers about salsa verde versus roja, and Dominic felt shame hit him like a physical blow. This woman had tried to save his legacy, and he'd had her blacklisted, made sure she couldn't work in wine again. She looked up and saw him, and her expression cycled through recognition, wariness, and finally cold dismissal. We're out of champagne and caviar, she said flatly, but I can make you some excellent street tacos. Dominic approached the window, aware of customers watching with interest. Ms. Flores, I need to talk to you. She wiped her hands on her apron, her movements deliberate. 3 months ago, you needed me to leave your property before you called the police, she said. What changed? He deserved that, deserved worse. You were right, he said simply. About the wine, about the sabotage, about everything. She studied him for a long moment, and he saw something in her eyes that looked like vindication mixed with sorrow. I know I was right, she said. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Dominic took a breath. I need your help. The estate is going bankrupt. The wine is ruined, and I don't know how to fix it. Elena leaned against the counter, her expression unreadable. Let me see if I understand, she said slowly. You publicly humiliated me, had me thrown out by security, blacklisted me from every vineyard in Napa, and now you want my help? She laughed, a sound without humor. That's bold, Mr. Rousseau. Dominic felt his face flush. I was wrong, about you, about everything. He pulled out the security footage on his phone, showed her Andre's furtive movements. I think my head winemaker sabotaged the vintage, and you're the only person who might know how to salvage something. Elena watched the footage, her jaw tightening. Why would Andre sabotage his own work? It was a question Dominic had been asking himself for days. I don't know, but I intend to find out. Elena closed the taco truck early that afternoon, something she never did, following Dominic back to Chateau Rousseau in her battered Honda Civic that made sounds suggesting imminent death. She told herself she was doing this for the wine, for the craft her family had perfected over generations, definitely not because part of her wanted to prove to Dominic Rousseau exactly how much he'd underestimated her. Maria had texted worried messages. "Are you crazy? He fired you." But Elena couldn't explain the pull she felt toward the estate, toward the challenge of saving wine, that everyone else had given up on. Her grandmother's voice whispered approval. Holding grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, Mija. Still, as she drove through the gates where security had escorted her out 3 months ago, Elena's hands were shaking. The estate looked different in daylight without party decorations. Older, sadder, like a beautiful woman whose makeup had been washed away by tears. Dominic led her directly to Barrel Room 3, his movement stiff with barely contained anxiety. And when he unlocked the restricted section, Elena was hit by the unmistakable scent of failed fermentation. She approached the barrel slowly, running her hands over French oak, feeling the warmth that indicated the wine inside was still active, still fighting. "May I taste?" she asked, and Dominic handed her a wine thief and glass without comment. Elena drew a sample from the first barrel, swirled it professionally, inhaled deeply, and took a small sip before spitting it into a drain. "How bad?" Dominic asked, his voice tight. "Bad," Elena confirmed, moving to the next barrel. The refined sugar disrupted the natural yeast activity. You've got mixed fermentation, off flavors, probably some acetic acid bacteria contamination. She tasted 3 more samples, her face growing grimmer with each one. Most of this is unsalvageable for premium wine. Dominic slumped against the barrel, and for the first time, Elena saw him not as the arrogant master sommelier who'd humiliated her, but as a man watching his life's work dissolve into vinegar. $40 million, he said quietly. My father's legacy, 15 years of building this estate gone. Elena felt an unexpected stab of sympathy, remembering her own father's vineyard burning while cartel soldiers laughed. Not necessarily gone, she heard herself say. Just complicated. Dominic's head snapped up. You think you can fix this? Elena set down the wine thief carefully. Fix? No. This wine will never be what you intended. She walked slowly down the rows of barrels, her mind calculating possibilities. But there might be a way to salvage the best barrels, blend them strategically, use techniques my family developed for challenging vintages. She turned to face him. It won't be a Chateau Rousseau wine as the world knows it. It would be something different, experimental. Dominic stood up straighter. Different how? Elena took a breath, knowing what she was about to suggest would horrify traditional winemakers. My grandmother taught me blending methods from Mexico's Guadalupe Valley, using natural acids to balance artificial sweetness, incorporating indigenous yeast strains, aging processes that can mask flaws while creating new complexity. Mexican winemaking techniques? Dominic's tone was skeptical but not dismissive. I've never heard of Guadalupe Valley producing notable wines. Elena felt the familiar sting of her culture being dismissed, but pushed it aside. Most people haven't. Cartel violence destroyed the region's reputation before the wine could reach international markets. She met his eyes steadily. My family's vineyard, Venedos Flores Mendoza, produced wines that competed with Bordeaux in blind tastings before violence shut us down. Dominic's expression shifted to surprise. Flores Mendoza? I've read about your family in historical wine journals, 4th-generation winemakers, traditional methods. Elena nodded slowly. That's my family, was my family before my father was killed and we had to flee. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with loss. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, he finally said, for what happened to your family and for how I treated you. Elena shrugged, trying to keep her voice steady. You weren't the first rich man to assume I was nobody, Mr. Rousseau. You were just the most public about it. She gestured toward the barrels. We're wasting time. If we're going to save anything from this vintage, we need to start now. Dominic pulled out his phone. What do you need? Elena's mind was already working through protocols. Access to your entire cellar, including the experimental reserves your father laid down. We'll need aged wine for blending. Dominic nodded. Done. What else? Elena looked at him directly. I need you to trust me completely, even when what I'm doing seems crazy by Napa standards. After what happened, I'd be an idiot not to trust you, Dominic said. What's your first step? Elena walked back to the first barrel. We taste every single barrel in this room, categorize them by damage level, isolate the ones that might be salvageable. She picked up the wine thief again. This will take all night, maybe longer. Dominic removed his Tom Ford jacket, rolled up his shirt sleeves. I've got nowhere else to be, he said. My accountant scheduled a bankruptcy meeting for next week. If we haven't fixed this by then, it won't matter anyway. Elena found herself almost smiling. Bankruptcy meeting is Thursday? Dominic nodded. Then we got 6 days to create a miracle, Elena said, pulling out a notebook. Let's get started. They worked through the night, tasting and taking notes on 60 barrels, and Elena discovered something unexpected. Dominic Russo, when humbled, was actually capable of listening. He didn't question her methods, didn't mansplain fermentation chemistry, just followed her instructions with the focused intensity of someone who'd finally realized how little he truly understood. Around 3 a.m., exhausted and wine-stained, they sat on the stone floor eating Chinese takeout that Dominic had ordered from Napa's only 24-hour restaurant. Can I ask you something? Dominic said between bites of Kung Pao chicken. How did you end up working Vineyard Harvest if you have winemaking expertise? Elena set down her chopsticks, debating how much to share. Because nobody would hire me, she finally said. What do you mean? Dominic looked genuinely confused. With your background, any vineyard would assume I was lying, Elena interrupted. I'm Mexican. I work cash jobs. I don't have papers proving my degree because I had to flee Guadalupe Valley with nothing but my grandmother's cross and my father's last bottle of wine. She laughed bitterly. I interviewed at 17 vineyards in Napa before I gave up. They all assumed I was making up credentials, or worse. They assumed I was here illegally and didn't want to deal with paperwork. Dominic's face had gone pale. Your degree, where did you actually study? Elena met his eyes. UC Davis, Enology program. Graduated summa cum laude 7 years ago. She watched his expression cycle through shock and shame. I could have fixed your wine 3 months ago, Mr. Russo, but you were too busy assuming I was nobody to actually ask who I was. The revelation hung between them like smoke, and Dominic felt something fundamental shift in how he saw Elena Flores. Not as a vineyard worker who got lucky with a warning, but as a master craftsperson working beneath her station because the world refused to see her worth. You see, Davis summa cum laude, he repeated quietly. Why didn't you tell me that night at the harvest celebration? Elena's laugh was sharp. Because you didn't give me 30 seconds to speak before calling security. She stood up, brushing off her jeans. And because of my experience, men like you don't listen until it's too late. The words stung, but Dominic couldn't argue with their truth. He watched her move through the barrel room with the confidence of someone who'd been born to this work, and wondered how many other talented people he dismissed over the years because they didn't fit his mental image of excellence. Tell me about your family's vineyard, he said, standing to join her at a barrel she'd marked as possible salvation. Elena's hand stilled on the oak, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Venedos Flores Mendoza was founded by my great-grandfather in 1952, she finally said, her voice soft with memory. He planted Nebbiolo grapes. Everyone said he was crazy, that Italian grapes wouldn't work in Mexican soil, but he proved them wrong. She drew another sample, held it up to the dim light. My grandfather expanded the Tempranillo and Malbec, creating blends that won awards in Europe before Mexico's wine industry was taken seriously. Her face clouded. My father was going to take over, had just signed a distribution deal with importers in New York, when the cartels decided our land was perfect for growing something more profitable than grapes. Dominic felt his chest tighten at the pain in her voice. What happened? Elena was quiet for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then they came at harvest, 10 men with guns, told my father he had 2 choices, Partner with them or die. She tasted the sample, made a note in her book, her movements mechanical. My father chose death, said he wouldn't let his family's legacy become cover for drug operations. Her hand trembled slightly. They shot him in the vineyard, in front of the workers, in front of my mother. Dominic closed his eyes, imagining the horror. How old were you? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. 17, just graduated from high school, had my acceptance letter to UC Davis in my backpack. She set down the glass carefully. We fled that night with nothing, left everything behind except my grandmother who insisted on coming with us. Your grandmother, Dominic said, remembering how Elena had mentioned her teachings. Is she? Died 2 years ago, Elena interrupted, her voice cracking slightly. Cancer, no health insurance. Wouldn't let me take her to the hospital until it was too late. She wiped her eyes quickly, angry at herself for showing emotion. She taught me everything about wine in those last years, said the knowledge couldn't die just because the vineyard did. Elena pulled out a worn leather journal from her bag, pages yellowed and wine-stained, filled with handwritten notes in Spanish. This was hers, 4 generations of winemaking secrets, techniques nobody else knows. She handed it to Dominic. If we're going to save your wine, we'll need them all. Dominic opened the journal carefully, saw formulas and sketches and notes in the margins, and realized he was holding something priceless. Why are you helping me? He asked, looking up from the journal. After everything I did, after I destroyed your reputation in Napa, why are you here? Elena took the journal back, clutching it to her chest. Because $40 million of wine shouldn't go to waste just because you're an arrogant asshole, she said bluntly. And despite everything, Dominic laughed. Fair enough. Elena's expression turned serious. And because my father taught me that good wine is bigger than ego, bigger than revenge, it's art that deserves to be protected. She opened the journal to a specific page. My grandmother has a note here. Mija, someday you'll have to save a fool's wine to prove you're not one. I guess that day is today. They worked for 3 more days straight, sleeping in shifts on the barrel room floor, surviving on coffee and whatever food Dominic had delivered. Elena introduced him to techniques he'd never imagined, incorporating natural acids from preserved lemons to balance the artificial sweetness, using wild yeast cultures she cultivated from her grandmother's original vineyard soil. Somehow she'd smuggled a jar, aging in a combination of French and American oak to create complexity that masked the damage. This is insane, Dominic said on the 4th day, watching Elena add what looked like tea to a barrel. That's hibiscus from Oaxaca, she explained. It'll add tannins and color, while creating a flavor profile that's completely unique. Dominic tasted the blend, and his eyes widened. That's actually incredible. Elena smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. On the 6th day, just 30 hours before the bankruptcy meeting, they had 15 barrels of salvage wine. Not the $40 million vintage Dominic had promised, but something else entirely. A revolutionary hybrid that tasted like Napa terroir filtered through Mexican soul. Dominic called Robert Parker personally, asked him to come back for a private tasting, knowing this was either salvation or career suicide. Parker arrived skeptical, sat down with his legendary palate, ready to destroy what remained of Dominic's reputation. Elena served the wine, explaining nothing about its origin or methods. Just let the liquid speak for itself. Parker swirled, sniffed, tasted, and his expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and finally wonder. What the hell did you do to this wine? He demanded, not angry but fascinated. It tastes like Napa, but also something completely different, something I've never experienced. Dominic looked at Elena, who nodded permission. I had help, he said simply, from someone who knows more about winemaking than I ever will. He gestured to Elena. This is Elena Flores Mendoza. Her family has been making wine in Mexico for 4 generations. Parker's eyes widened with recognition. Flores Mendoza? I've read about your family in historical journals. Your father's Nebbiolo was legendary. Elena's voice caught. You know about my father's wines? Parker stood up, his critic's facade dropping. I tasted a bottle in 1998 at a blind tasting in Bordeaux. It finished third against Premier Cru Burlos. He looked at the glass in his hand with new understanding. Did you make this? Elena nodded. With Mr. Rousseau's help, using my grandmother's techniques to salvage wine that Andre Beaumont sabotaged. The room went silent. Sabotage? Parker said sharply. You're accusing your head winemaker sabotage. Dominic pulled out his laptop, showed the security footage of Andre adding sugar to barrels, explained the pattern of deliberate destruction. We don't know why yet, Dominic admitted. But Elena was right 3 months ago when she tried to warn me, and I was too arrogant to listen. Parker looked between them, his journalist mind clearly connecting dots. Where's Andre Beaumont now? Dominic's jaw tightened. I fired him 5 days ago. Haven't seen him since. Elena's phone buzzed. A message from Maria. Turn on the news. Your friend Simone is being interviewed about buying Chateau Rousseau. Elena's blood went cold as she showed the message to Dominic. Your ex-wife, she said slowly. What if this was never about Andre? What if he was working for her? Dominic's face went white as he pulled up Timsy on his phone, and there was Simone in a crisp white Chanel suit, standing outside a bank in San Francisco, explaining to reporters how she planned to purchase Chateau Rousseau at bankruptcy auction. It's unfortunate that Dominic let his arrogance ruin such a historic estate, Simone said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. But I'm confident I can restore its reputation once it's under new ownership. The reporter asked about the sabotage allegations, and Simone's laugh was crystalline. Sabotage? Please, Dominic is simply looking for someone to blame for his own incompetence. She leaned toward the camera. I have investors ready to transform Chateau Rousseau into what it should have been all along, a proper luxury brand, not one man's ego project. The video cut off, and Dominic looked like he might be sick. She's been planning this for months, Elena said, pieces falling into place. The sabotage, the public rejection, the perfect timing of her purchase offer, it's all coordinated. Robert Parker was already on his phone, calling sources, his face grim. I'm hearing rumors that Simone Rousseau has been in contact with international wine distributors for 6 months, he said, listening to whoever was on the other end. There's speculation she paid them to reject the vintage regardless of quality. Dominic slumped into a chair, the betrayal hitting him like a physical blow. She wanted me destroyed, he said quietly. Not just divorced, not just separated, completely destroyed. Elena felt rage building in her chest, remembering her own humiliation at the harvest celebration, and wondered how many of Simone's schemes she'd been an unwitting pawn in. We need proof, Parker said, ever the journalist. Security footage is enough. We need to connect Andre directly to Simone, show premeditation. Elena's mind raced through possibilities. Then she remembered something. The sugar, she said abruptly. Andre was adding refined sugar. Not just any sugar, but a specific type used in commercial wine fraud. She turned to Dominic. Do you have records of bulk purchases for this state? Dominic nodded, pulling up procurement files on his laptop. Everything goes through our accounting system. They searched through months of receipts, finding nothing unusual until Elena had an idea. Check Andre's personal credit cards. If Simone paid him to sabotage, he might have bought supplies himself to avoid detection. Dominic hesitated. Accessing employee financial records was legally questionable, but Parker made a call to a contact who made things happen. An hour later, they had proof. Andre's Amex showed $8,000 worth of refined sugar purchases over 3 months, bought from a specialty supplier in Sacramento. More damning, his phone records showed daily calls to a burner phone, and that burner phone had called Simone's private number 17 times. We've got them, Parker said, his journalist instincts fully engaged now. This is fraud, corporate sabotage, conspiracy to commit bankruptcy fraud. We're talking federal crimes. Dominic's phone rang. His lawyer panicked. Dominic, Simone just filed an emergency motion to accelerate the bankruptcy proceedings, the lawyer said. She's claiming you're hiding assets. The judge moved a hearing to tomorrow morning. Dominic's hand tightened on the phone. Can we stop it? The lawyer's voice was grim. Not without significant proof of fraud. And even then... Elena grabbed the phone from Dominic. This is Elena Flores. she said into the phone. Tell the judge we have new evidence of sabotage, security footage, financial records, phone logs. The lawyer hesitated. And you are? Elena took a breath. I'm the head winemaker who's going to save Chateau Rousseau, and I'm ready to testify. She hung up before the lawyer could argue, then turned to Dominic and Parker. Tomorrow morning, we go public with everything. The sabotage, Simone's conspiracy, the hybrid wine. Parker was already typing on his phone. I'll write the article tonight. Front page of Wine Spectator online by morning. Dominic looked between them. Something like hope dawning on his face. You'd risk your reputation on this? Parker smiled grimly. I'm a journalist. I live for stories like this. They spent the night preparing, documenting every piece of evidence, photographing Elena's grandmother's journal, recording video testimony about the sabotage. At 2 a.m., Elena was alone in the barrel room when Dominic found her, 2 glasses and a bottle of the hybrid wine in hand. I wanted to say thank you, he said, sitting beside her on the stone floor, for everything. You didn't have to help me, especially after how I treated you. Elena accepted the glass, swirling the wine they created together. I didn't do it for you, she said honestly. I did it for the wine, for my family's legacy. Dominic nodded, tasting the hybrid creation. It's extraordinary, nothing like what I planned, but somehow better. Elena smiled slightly. My grandmother used to say the best wines come from chaos. When everything goes wrong, that's when art happens. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of tomorrow's confrontation heavy between them. What will you do after this? Dominic asked. Go back to the taco truck? Elena looked at her wine-stained hands, thought about her grandmother's journal, her father's last bottle still hidden in her apartment. I don't know, she admitted. I never planned past survival. Never imagined I'd get the chance to make wine again. Dominic set down his glass carefully. What if you didn't have to go back? Elena's heart skipped. What do you mean? Dominic turned to face her fully. What if, after tomorrow, assuming we survive bankruptcy and humiliate Simone, you stayed here as head winemaker? Elena laughed, thinking he was joking, but his expression was completely serious. Dominic, I'm not asking as charity, he interrupted. I'm asking because you're the most talented winemaker I've ever met, and because Chateau Rousseau needs someone who understands that excellence isn't about ego. Elena felt tears threatening and forced them back. You barely know me, she said. I know you saved my legacy when you had every reason to let me drown, Dominic said softly. I know you've got more talent in your wine-stained fingers than I'll have in my lifetime. He stood up, offering his hand to help her up. Think about it, but know that whatever happens tomorrow, you're not going back to that taco truck unless you choose to. Elena took his hand, felt the warmth and strength there, and allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't running anymore, wasn't hiding, wasn't surviving, but actually living. Okay, she whispered. I'll think about it. Dominic smiled, and for the first time since they'd met, Elena saw him not as the arrogant master sommelier, but as a man who'd been humble enough to become decent. The bankruptcy hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. in San Francisco federal court, and the parking lot was already packed with news vans when Elena and Dominic arrived. Parker's article had dropped at 6 a.m., The Great Rousseau Conspiracy, How Sabotage and Betrayal Nearly Destroyed Napa's Premier Estate, and had gone viral within hours, trending on Twitter and making headlines from CNN to the BBC. Simone's lawyers were already inside, her platinum hair perfect as always, and when she saw Dominic and Elena enter together, her Botox face managed to convey pure hatred. You brought your vineyard worker? She said loud enough for reporters to hear. How desperate, Dominic. Elena met her eyes calmly. I'm not a vineyard worker. I'm Elena Flores Mendoza, UC Davis graduate, and the winemaker who saved your ex-husband's estate from your sabotage. Simone's lawyer stood up, objecting before the judge even entered. Your Honor, these accusations of sabotage are inflammatory and unsubstantiated. They're actually quite substantiated. Parker interrupted from the gallery, holding up a folder thick with evidence. Financial records, security footage, phone logs, all documented in my article this morning. The judge, a severe woman in her 60s named MICHELIN, held up her hand for silence. "Everyone sit down," she ordered. "This hearing is about bankruptcy proceedings, not criminal accusations." But Dominic's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, the bankruptcy itself is the result of corporate sabotage. We have evidence that Mrs. Rousseau conspired with the defendant's head winemaker to deliberately destroy the estate's vintage in order to purchase it at auction." Judge Chen's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" For the next hour, they presented everything: security footage showing Andre adding sugar to barrels, credit card receipts for bulk refined sugar purchases, phone records connecting Andre to Simone, and testimony from Elena about the technical specifics of the sabotage. Simone's face grew progressively paler, her lawyer frantically whispering objections. But the evidence was damning. "Your Honor," Simone's lawyer finally said, "even if there was some irregularity with the wine production, it doesn't change the fact that Chateau Rousseau is bankrupt." Dominic stood up. "Actually, it does, because we have contracts with 3 new distributors who want the hybrid wine Elena created." He handed the judge signed letters of intent, worth $52 million, more than enough to satisfy creditors and avoid bankruptcy. Judge Shin reviewed the documents carefully. "These are contingent on the wine being available for immediate distribution." "It will be," Elena said, standing up despite her lawyer's attempt to pull her back down. "I have 15 barrels ready for bottling, and a blending formula that can replicate the process for larger production." Judge Shin studied Elena with interest. "You're the UC Davis graduate mentioned in Mr. Parker's article?" Elena nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I studied under Dr. Sarah Martinez, graduated summa cum laude in 2018. The judge's expression softened slightly. "Dr. Martinez was my college roommate. She's mentioned you in conversations, said you were one of her most brilliant students." Elena felt her throat tighten. She was an incredible mentor. Judge Chin set down the documents. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm suspending bankruptcy proceedings pending criminal investigation into allegations of corporate sabotage." She looked directly at Simone. "Mrs. Rousseau, you and Andre Beaumont are ordered to appear before this court next week to answer fraud charges." The courtroom erupted in noise, reporters shouting questions, Simone's lawyer demanding appeals, cameras flashing everywhere. Simone herself stood up, her composure finally cracking. "You can't prove anything," she shouted at Dominic. "You were always a failure. Your father knew it. I knew it. Everyone knows it." Dominic remained calm, his voice steady. "Maybe I was a failure, but at least I never destroyed something beautiful just to make myself feel powerful." Simone lunged toward him, but security restrained her, and as they led her out of the courtroom, she screamed, "This isn't over." But everyone watching knew it was. Justice had been served, publicly and completely. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, years of fear and hiding and survival finally releasing in gasping sobs, and Dominic wrapped his arm around her shoulders while cameras captured the moment. The master sommelier and the vineyard worker who'd saved each other. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded them like sharks, questions overlapping in chaos. Parker pushed through the crowd, his journalist's badge giving him access. "How does it feel to be vindicated?" he asked Elena directly. She wiped her eyes, took a breath, and found her voice. "It feels like my father and grandmother are finally at peace," she said. "They taught me that good work eventually speaks for itself. I just wish they could see this moment." A reporter from CNN shouted, "What's next for Chateau Rousseau?" Dominic stepped forward. "Next, we bottle the hybrid wine that Elena created. We're calling it Corazon del Valle, Heart of the Valley." He looked at Elena with something that might have been admiration, or might have been more. "And we're announcing that Elena Flores Mendoza is Chateau Rousseau's new head winemaker and partner." The crowd erupted with more questions. But Elena couldn't hear them. Her mind had stopped at the word partner. Back at the estate that evening, Elena stood in the barrel room where it had all begun, holding her grandmother's journal and her father's last bottle of wine. Dominic found her there, 2 glasses in hand again. "I didn't mean to spring the partnership announcement on you publicly," he said. "I should have asked first." Elena turned to face him, and in the dim light, she saw him fully for the first time. Not the arrogant master sommelier, not the desperate man facing bankruptcy, but someone who'd been humbled into becoming better. "Why partnership?" she asked. You could just hire me as head winemaker. Dominic set down the glasses. Because this estate needs what you have, not just winemaking skill, but soul integrity, a connection to something bigger than profit. He gestured around the barrel room. My father built this place, I expanded it, but it was always about ego, about proving something. He looked at her directly. You reminded me that wine is supposed to be about beauty, about legacy, about honoring the earth and the people who work it. Elena felt something shift in her chest. A barrier she built around her heart after losing everything cracking open. I need to tell you something, she said quietly. 3 months ago, when you fired me, when everyone laughed, I wanted to see you fail. Dominic nodded. I deserve that. Elena shook her head. But working with you these past days, watching you actually listen, actually change, I realize you're not the man who threw me out. She picked up her father's last bottle. My father made this wine the month before he died. I've been saving it for something important. She held it up to the light. I think he wants us to share it now. Dominic's eyes widened. Elena, that's too precious. Nothing is too precious to share with someone who respects what it represents, she interrupted, already opening the bottle. They poured the wine, and Elena felt her father's presence in the room as they raised their glasses. To your father, Dominic said, and to your grandmother, they raised someone extraordinary. Elena's voice caught. To everyone who believed in wine as art, not just business. They drank, and the wine was everything Elena remembered, complex, layered, her father's soul captured in liquid form. Dominic tasted it with tears in his eyes. This is the most beautiful wine I've ever experienced, he whispered. Your father was a genius. Elena nodded, unable to speak, and then Dominic did something unexpected. He pulled her into a hug, not romantic, but human. Two people who'd walked through fire and emerged changed. They stood like that for a long time, the barrel room silent, except for the sound of wine aging in oak, and Elena felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Safe. I want to do something, Dominic said, pulling back. I want to fund a scholarship at UC Davis in your father's name for students from underrepresented communities studying enology. Elena's heart stopped. Dominic, it's the least I can do, he interrupted. What happened to you? Being qualified but dismissed because of discrimination. It's unacceptable. He pulled out his phone, already writing notes. We'll call it the Jose Flores Memorial Scholarship for Excellence in Winemaking. Elena felt tears streaming again, but these were different. Tears of healing, of possibility, of a future where her father's death meant something beyond tragedy. He would have loved that, she whispered. He believed in education above everything else. Dominic smiled. Then let's make sure his belief lives on. 6 months later, Corazon del Valle launched at a gala event that was the exact opposite of the harvest celebration, where Elena had been humiliated. This time, vineyard workers sat at the head tables wearing new clothes purchased by the estate, Maria weeping with joy as Dominic personally thanked her for her loyalty. Wine critics from around the world lined up to taste the revolutionary hybrid, and the response was unanimous. Corazon del Valle was unlike anything they'd experienced. Napa's precision combined with Mexico's soul, creating something entirely new. Robert Parker gave it a perfect 100-point score with a note. This wine represents the future of American viticulture. Collaboration over competition, innovation over tradition. Orders flooded and worth over $70 million. And Chateau Rousseau went from bankruptcy to profitability in 6 months. More importantly, the Jose Flores Memorial Scholarship was announced, fully funded for 10 students per year, and Elena received letters from young Lading's winemakers thanking her for opening doors. But the real story was quieter, happening in the barrel room where Dominic and Elena worked side by side late into the night, perfecting blends for the next vintage. Their partnership had evolved from professional to personal slowly, naturally, like wine developing complexity over time. Dominic had changed in fundamental ways, listening more, assuming less, treating every worker on the estate with respect rather than dismissal. Elena had changed too, shedding the defensive armor she'd worn since fleeing Guadalupe Valley, allowing herself to trust again, to dream again, to love again. Because that's what it was, though neither had said it aloud yet. love, messy and complicated and completely unexpected. They dated briefly, gone to dinners where they talk about fermentation techniques and laughed at inside jokes about vineyard drama. And one night in the barrel room, Dominic had kissed her carefully, asking permission with his eyes. Elena had kissed back, tasting the future on his lips. Tonight, the estate was hosting the International Wine Competition award ceremony, where Corazon del Valle had won double gold, the highest honor in viticulture. Elena wore a dress for the first time in years, emerald green silk that Maria had insisted she buy. And when she entered the grand hall, the crowd actually gasped. "You look stunning," Dominic whispered, offering his arm, and Elena felt like a different person. Not hiding, not surviving, but actually thriving. The ceremony was a blur of speeches and applause, but Elena only remembered one moment clearly, when they announced Corazon del Valle as double gold winner, and she and Dominic walked to the stage together, equal partners, and the entire room gave them a standing ovation. Parker was in the front row, tears streaming down his face, and later he told her, "This is why I love wine. It brings people together, breaks barriers, creates beauty from chaos." After the ceremony, Dominic led Elena away from the party, to the vineyard under stars that seemed brighter than usual. They walked to Barrel Room 3, where it had all started, and Dominic pulled out a bottle, not Corazon del Valle, but something else. "I made this for you," he said, his voice nervous. "It's a blend of the first wine my father ever made, and the last wine your father made. I've been aging it in secret for 3 months. Elena's breath caught as she saw the label. Unlikely hearts, 2 families, 1 legacy. Dominic poured 2 glasses, and when Elena tasted it, she understood what he was really saying. This wasn't just wine, it was a promise. "It's perfect," she whispered, and Dominic took her hands. "Elena Flores Mendoza, you saved my life in every way that matters," he said. "You taught me what excellence really means. You showed me that humility is strength, and you made me want to be a better man." Dominic, Elena started, but he continued. "I know we've only been together 6 months. I know this is crazy fast. But I also know that when something is right, time doesn't matter." He pulled out a small box, and Elena's heart thundered. "Will you marry me?" The ring inside was simple platinum with a single diamond, elegant and unpretentious. Exactly right. Elena looked at the man who'd humiliated her, who'd then humbled himself, who'd learned and changed and grown into someone worthy. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying simultaneously. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Dominic slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed in the barrel room where everything had gone wrong, then right, then beyond anything either could have imagined. The wine aged peacefully around them, bearing silent witness to love that broke class barriers, healed old wounds, and proved that the best stories come from the most unlikely places. The wedding happened 3 months later during harvest season, exactly as Elena had always dreamed. Not in some sterile cathedral, but in the vineyard under September sun with workers and wine critics mixed together, class barriers dissolved in celebration. Maria cried through the entire ceremony, and Parker gave a toast about underdogs and romance that made national news. Elena wore her grandmother's silver cross and her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit. And when she walked down the aisle between rows of Cabernet Sauvignon vines, she felt her father and grandmother walking beside her in spirit. Dominic cried when he saw her, and his vows were simple. "I promise to always listen, to never assume, to honor your talent, and to love you forever." Elena's vows were equally simple. "I promise to challenge you, to keep you humble, to share my grandmother's secrets, and to love you even when you're being arrogant." Everyone laughed, including Dominic, and when they kissed, 300 people cheered like it was the Super Bowl. The reception lasted until dawn, with wine flowing freely and dancing under stars, and at some point, Dominic's father's old friend, a master sommelier from France, stood up and declared, "This is what wine is about, not points or prices, but bringing people together." Elena and Dominic snuck away around 2 a.m., exhausted and happy, and found themselves back in Barrel Room 3, because of course they did. "We should probably stop having all our important moments in this room," Dominic joked, pulling Elena close. "Why?" Elena said, resting her head on his shoulder. "This is where I fell in love with you, watching you learn, watching you change, watching you become the man I needed you to be." Dominic kissed her forehead. When did you know? Elena smiled. The third night, when you rolled up your Tom Ford sleeves and said, "Teach me," that's when I knew you were different. They stood together in comfortable silence, wine aging around them, and for the first time in years, Elena felt completely at peace. 6 months after the wedding, Elena called Dominic to the barrel room with urgency in her voice, and he ran thinking something was wrong with the wine. Instead, he found her holding a pregnancy test, tears streaming down her face, laughing and crying simultaneously. "We're having a baby," she said, and Dominic whooped with joy loud enough to startle workers in the vineyard. They decided to wait to tell anyone until Elena's second trimester, wanted to savor the secret, and those months were among their happiest. Planning nurseries, arguing over names, wondering if their child would inherit Elena's palate or Dominic's business sense. Wine Spectator found out somehow. Parker swore he didn't leak it, and published a feature titled "The Future of American Wine, Chateau Rousseau's Next Generation," with photos of Elena and Dominic in the vineyard, her baby bump visible beneath her work shirt. The article went viral, garnering millions of views, and Elena received hundreds of messages from young women saying she'd inspired them to pursue careers in wine. The baby was born on a Tuesday morning in April, a girl with Dominic's dark hair and Elena's brown eyes, and they named her Sophia, after Elena's grandmother. The nursery was in Chateau, overlooking the vineyard, and Sophia's first sounds were wind through grape leaves and wine aging in barrels. When Sophia was 3 months old, Elena returned to work part-time, bringing the baby to the barrel room in a carrier while she tested blends. Dominic would find them there, Elena making notes with one hand, rocking Sophia with the other, and fall in love all over again with both of them. The estate thrived under their partnership, producing wines that won awards and broke sales records. But more importantly, it became known as a place where workers were treated with dignity, where innovation was celebrated, and where love had literally saved the day. Maria became Sophia's honorary grandmother. Maria's grandchildren became Sophia's playmates, and the estate felt less like a business and more like a family. On Sophia's first birthday, Elena and Dominic stood in the vineyard at sunset, their daughter babbling happily in Dominic's arms. "Can you believe it's been 2 years since the harvest celebration?" Elena said, remembering that terrible night when she'd been thrown out. "2 years since I was the arrogant asshole who didn't deserve you," Dominic corrected, kissing Sophia's forehead. "I think about that night a lot, how close I came to losing everything because I refused to listen." Elena leaned against him. "You didn't lose everything. You just had to lose your ego first." Dominic laughed. "Fair point." They watched the sun set over the vines they'd saved together, over the estate that was now equally theirs, over the life they'd built from humiliation and sabotage and unlikely love. Sophia reached for a grape leaf, and Elena caught her hand gently. "Not yet, Mija. Wait a few years, then Mama will teach you everything." "Everything?" Dominic asked with a smile. Elena nodded, her voice soft of memory and promise. "Everything. My grandmother's secrets, my father's techniques, how to taste the truth in wine when men lie." She looked up at Dominic. "And how to recognize a good man when he finally figures out how to be one." Dominic kissed her properly then, deep and loving, while Sophia giggled between them. The vineyard stretched out in perfect rows. The chateau stood proud against the sunset, and somewhere in Barrel Room 3, Corazon del Valle continued aging into something even more beautiful. Elena thought about her father watching from wherever he was now, about her grandmother's satisfied smile, about all the pain and loss that had led to this moment. "We made it," she whispered. "Against all odds, we actually made it." Dominic held her tighter. "No, you made it happen. I was just lucky enough to finally see you." And in that golden moment, surrounded by the vines they'd saved and the love they'd built, Elena Flores Mendoza Rousseau knew the happy endings, real ones, earned ones, unlikely ones, were sweeter than any wine ever created.